So long as trade has traveled over the seas, there have been people who have tried to steal it. Piracy is old, perhaps older than even history itself, and as such there is a long list of people who have made a name for themselves, taking what isn't theirs and turning it into, well, theirs. From the colonial cities of the Caribbean to the shores of the Mediterranean to the coasts of Madagascar and further along to the South China Sea, piracy is truly a global phenomenon. Or rather, it was. Today, piracy is largely contained across the world, mostly from the efforts of global navies like the United States and others. But the legacy of these figures lives on, and today we have for you a few names from that long list of pirates. Some of them you might recognize, and others you might not. But they all earned their places one way or another. These are a few of the most notorious pirates in all of history.
There once was a ship that put to sea, and the name of the ship was the Bulliarty.
Starting off with the absolute easiest entry we could possibly pick, we have the most famous pirate in the entire history of the subject, Blackbeard. Blackbeard is one of those characters that has been referenced so many times in so many different mediums that sometimes it's hard to remember if he was actually a real person or not. Well, he was an actual person, specifically an Englishman by the name of Edward Teach. Teach was born into the city of Bristol in Western England, and we know precious little about his early life. Spoiler, this became a theme for most pirates who weren't known to speak at length about the difficulties of their childhood that drove them to raid and plunder. Nevertheless, we do know that by the turn of the 18th century, Teach was in the Caribbean, and when the War of Spanish Succession broke out in 1701 and dragged England into war against France and Spain, Teach joined up on a privateer's ship. A quick primer, a privateer is basically a pirate that has been hired by a government. By several accounts, Teach was a courageous fighter and is said to have served in the war until its end in 1714. 2 years later, Teach found himself in the port of Nassau in the Bahamas. Nassau historically was a pirate stronghold in the same vein as Tortuga, and this was certainly the case when Teach arrived. He liked what he saw, and then he joined up with a renowned pirate by the name of Benjamin Hornigold, a former privateer who, like Teach, was out of a job following the end of the war. Many privateers were out of work, as a matter of fact, and if there's one thing people don't like doing, it's switching careers. These privateers, as a result, ended up turning en masse to piracy instead, often preying on the cargo ships of their old employers. Hornigold was an outlier, preferring to attack only French and Spanish ships, since he was an Englishman who had fought for England. But his crew thought differently, as the once English, now British trading ships sailed by laden with expensive products, just begging to be stolen. A vote was taken, and Hornigold was demoted as captain. He would retire from piracy afterwards, while Teach was given command of 2 of his ships. Teach didn't waste time, and he immediately captured a French ship, La Concorde, and renamed it Queen Anne's Revenge, after the British Queen that had fought for some years prior. With 3 ships under his command, Teach started ramping up his piratical efforts, seizing cargo, and when he was refused, winning the fights that followed. But Teach didn't exactly like to fight. He was shrewd, and he knew that any losses would be costly to replace. In the spirit of Sun Tzu, he preferred to win without fighting. To that end, he cultivated his reputation, presenting himself as a terrifying captain of the sea. He also began growing his beard to huge lengths. This detail was mentioned in the reports of his ransacking of cargo ships, earning him that famous nickname, Blackbeard. Blackbeard and his crews, which interestingly included several black sailors and freed slaves, proceeded to pirate their way up and down the Caribbean Sea, mostly in the region of the Bahamas, and even detouring up the American East Coast to blockade a town in South Carolina. But in 1718, he was faced with a difficult choice. The British government, feeling the pinch from all the piracy in the Caribbean, decided to issue a blanket pardon to every pirate in the Caribbean Sea. If he wanted, Blackbeard could retire and live the rest of his life in peace. Blackbeard ultimately decided to take the pardon, settling in North Carolina. But old habits die hard, and soon enough he went right back to piracy. The pirate's life is not a quiet life, we suppose. The governor of neighboring Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, decided that Blackbeard had to be removed, and that if he had to overstep his jurisdiction across colonial borders to make it happen, well, he'd do just that. He assigned a man, Robert Maynard, to take 2 ships and a crew to end Blackbeard's career, which they did in one last battle in the OCRACOKE Inlet in North Carolina. Blackbeard and his crew were taken by surprise, and after a short and bloody fight, the notorious pirate was dead. Those of Blackbeard's crew who had survived were returned to Virginia and hanged. Blackbeard's severed head was hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship. Maynard expected a significant reward for bringing down the famous Blackbeard, but in true British fashion, Spotswood stiffed him and Maynard ended up with almost nothing. He would fade into obscurity while Blackbeard, laughing in his grave, would go on to become the most famous pirate in all of history. Which is kind of interesting because his career as a pirate was both incredibly short and not actually that successful. Blackbeard was only active as a pirate for 2 years, and of the loot he acquired, he was outstripped by most of his contemporaries. Indeed, the lesser-known Bartholomew Roberts may have looted as much as 5 times what Blackbeard had. So why has Blackbeard outlived them all? Why does he spring to mind when we think of pirates? Perhaps his short career benefited him in that sense, allowing us to fill in the gaps ourselves and think of him as the archetypal pirate. It kind of makes sense then how the legend has outgrown the man.
Soon may the wellermen come to bring us sugar and tea and rum.
Our next entry is a double up, and it's going to take us across the Atlantic away from the Spanish colonies and into Spain proper, where a centuries-long war on the seas was playing out. Across the Mediterranean Sea from Spain and Italy was an area of North Africa known as the Barbary Coast. The term Barbary is derived from the word Berber, one of the primary ethnic groups of North Africa and one of the oldest cultures in the region. North Africa had routinely shown itself to be a perennial headache for the Spanish kingdoms in Iberia, first by carving out a number of sultanates in Iberia itself during the Middle Ages, and after the Reconquista in 1492 by being a haven for Barbary pirates. These corsairs, as they were called, were rampant, even more so than in the Caribbean. It's estimated that in the city of Algiers, the piracy industry accounted for as much as 25% of the city's workforce at its height. But the Barbary Coast's legacy as a collection of pirate states really begins with its most famous pirates, the brothers Uruk and Hizia Reis, better known by their pirate names of Uruk and Hayreddin Barbarossa. We know very little about their early lives. The two were born sometime between 1466 and 1478 on the Greek island of Lesbos, to a father who was either Turkish or Albanian. They were the second and third sons of their parents and first started out as traders. The brothers would become accomplished sailors in their own right, at first focused primarily on trading. Uruk was imprisoned for some time by the Knights of St. John, a Christian holy order dating back to the Crusades, which had turned to, funnily enough, piracy as well. Don't worry though, it was piracy in the name of God. So that's all good. But in a prelude to what the rest of their lives would look like, Uruk made a daring escape with the help of his brother, and the pair retreated to Anatolia in the Ottoman Empire. There, they were enlisted by a local governor to lead a fleet of galleys and fight the empire's enemies on the sea. These included the knights, who were menacing Ottoman ships, and the occasional Italian city. Over the next several years, Uruk and Hizia made names for themselves as capable naval commanders, winning battles and capturing ships as prizes. Their reputation spread into Christian Europe, where a nickname for Uruk, Baba Uruk, or Father Uruk, was nominalized in Barbarossa, or Redbeard in Italian. They raided coastal settlements and took captives, and many of those captives would end up being sold into slavery, which isn't good, but that's how piracy works, we guess. However, their legacies would be felt most in the Western Mediterranean in the aforementioned Barbary coast. In 1516, the brothers captured the city of Algiers, which had been conquered by the Spanish, first for being a pirate haven, and second for being a Muslim pirate haven. The brothers moved in and turned the city into their base of operations, and Uruk declared himself the new Sultan of Algiers. There then started a 2-year-long conflict between the brothers, Spain, and the old ruler of Algiers, who was not too keen on these Ottoman pirates ruling lands that was supposed to be his. In short, Uruk and Hizia won, although not by much. Uruk himself died in 1518, leaving his brother Hizia to take his place as ruler. It was around this time that Hizia was given an honorary title, Hayreddin, an Arabic honorific meaning best of the faith. Hayreddin then petitioned for his sultanate to be annexed by the Ottomans to get Spain off his back, and so Algeria became part of the growing empire, almost by accident. Hayreddin Barbarossa then spent the rest of his life raiding and pirating up and down the Mediterranean with his private fleet, occasionally being called to service with the empire to lead the navy personally. He amassed a huge fortune and a reputation as one of the finest naval commanders in the region before he retired in 1545 and died the following year. But the Barbary Coast would carry his legacy for another 3 centuries, being one of the most pirate-dense regions in the entire world until the North African coast was conquered by European powers in the 1800s. Today, the brothers Barbarossa have largely slipped by as footnotes, but in Istanbul, there is a mausoleum for Hayreddin, and the street of Barbaros Boulevard is named after him. Fittingly, it connects the Bosphorus Bridge over the sea. Our last entry in today's video is going to take us to the other side of Asia, to the Gulf of Tonkin. As we said at the start, piracy was a worldwide phenomenon, and East Asia was no exception. Japanese pirates, known as wok-up, plagued the coasts of China and Korea for several centuries, and in the late 18th century, China oversaw a truly stunning increase in the number of pirates harassing trade. Statistics are always a little bigger when it comes to China, but this was truly an order of magnitude larger than most other places. Between 1715 and 1725, around 5,000 individuals were active as pirates in the Caribbean during the so-called Golden Age of piracy. In China in 1805, there was a confederation of pirates numbering between 40,000 and 60,000 on anywhere from 400 to 600 vessels. Blackbeard had 4. That astonishing number can be essentially chalked up to the leadership of one man, Zheng Yi, and his wife and lover, Zheng Yi Sao. Zheng Yi was born in 1765 in Guangdong, one of the 2 major maritime centers of Imperial China. With the port city of Canton and the Portuguese trading post of Macau, this region was the first stop for any long-distance traders looking to do business in China. And China was quite an attractive market, having both porcelain dishes and the all-important tea, which Chinese merchants would only sell to Europeans for silver or gold, often by the boatload. In other words, plenty of money was to be made if you were an aspiring pirate. Zheng Yi's family had been in the piracy business for generations, taking advantage of the Qing dynasty's complete disinterest in naval affairs to establish himself as a dominant pirate leader in the South China Sea. He muscled in on the salt trade in particular, with every merchant paying protection money to him, but he wasn't done yet. Zheng Yi wasn't the only pirate in town, or rather at sea. But instead of trying to compete with these guys, Zheng Yi decided to work with them. He fashioned his own organization, the Red Flag Fleet, into a confederation with several other fleets of pirates, with a code of conduct and a proper business organization managed by his wife, Zheng Yi Sao. So let's talk about her for a minute. Zheng Yi Sao, which literally translates to Zheng Yi's wife, was born in 1775, also in Guangdong. She was born low in the social hierarchy and is believed to have worked in a brothel in Canton. In 1801, however, she caught the eye of Zheng Yi, who married her. She would prove to be every bit as capable as her husband, running the business affairs of the pirate confederation that had put together. He was the brawn, she was the brains, and she'd soon have the chance to prove it to everyone. In 1807, Zheng Yi died at the age of 42, supposedly swept overboard in a typhoon and drowned. Zheng Yi Sao proposed that she should be the next to lead the confederation, and with the support of Zheng Yi's adopted son, Cheong Po Sai, she got her wish. Zheng Yi Sao followed in the footsteps of her husband and took piracy up a notch. Where before the pirates had stuck to muscling in on businesses and raiding merchant ships, Zheng Yi Sao made preparations to start raiding the Pearl River Delta herself, including that major port city of Canton. In 2 battles, the pirates destroyed a large number of Qing ships, clearing the way for them to raid with impunity, which they did, burning villages, killing soldiers, and taking captives for ransom. It was also around this time that Zheng Yi Sao also started a romantic relationship with her husband's adopted son, which is a bit weird. The Qing, understandably frustrated with all of this pirate business going on, redoubled their efforts to deal with the problem. But the Qing Navy, as stated before, was neglected and couldn't deal with the battle-experienced pirates on their own. Nevertheless, they sent extra ships southwards towards Canton, and hoping to tip the scales in their favor, they sought help from the British and Portuguese ships. With foreign aid, the Qing Navy besieged Zheng Yi in the Bay of an Island. By some miracle, she escaped with few losses, but then the second largest faction in her pirate federation defected, offering his services to the government instead. But Zheng Yi Sao had a plan. She knew the tides weren't in her favor, so she was going to do what Blackbeard had failed to do: retire. With an offer of getting off the government's back and some arm twisting in the form of extra raids on local settlements, the Qin finally accepted her offer, and Zheng Yi Sao surrendered her fleet in 1810. In her retirement, she went back to her red light district roots and opened a gambling house in Canton before dying in 1844 at the age of 69. Zheng Yi Sao and her husband Zheng Yi stand tall as skilled naval commanders in a country not well known for its exploits on the water, and they turned piracy into a proper business, registering captured loot and people, along with rules and regulations on how to treat prisoners. Because the other thing that China does well, apparently, is admin.
Soon may the weathermen come to bring us sugar and tea and rum.
These were by no means the only famous pirates that we could have talked about, but hopefully you've learned something you didn't know before today. We didn't mention any privateers in this video, only pirates, and perhaps in the future, if you guys are interested, we can do an overview of some of them, such as Frenchman Robert Secouve, who, when told by a British prisoner on his ship that the French fight for money and the British for honor, replied that a man fights for what he has the least of. And even by pirate standards, that must have hurt. Let us know in the comments if you want that one.